My name is Councillor Kevin Lloydell. I am a chair of this committee. In accordance with the regulations made under Section 78 of the Coronavirus Act 2020, this remote meeting is being live streamed and recorded. The audio-visual recording will be made available on the county's website and YouTube channel shortly after the meeting. All meeting participants are reminded to speak slowly, clearly, and in the direction of their device's microphone at all times. A reminder that mobile phones and other electronic devices should be switched off or turned off and put onto silent mode, and those participating in the meeting should refrain from taking telephone calls. For the purpose of the recording of attendance, I can confirm that the following councillors are present and participating in this remote meeting. I'll read out the names, but because we've got Naveed Allen, who's not here yet. Pretty Joshua, welcome. Jeffrey Corfman is there somewhere. Myself, Kevin Lloydell, David Lloydell, and again, Ian Ridley, who's not here at the moment, who might join us later.
Chair, I can confirm that Ian Ridley has joined the meeting.
Thank you very much. Welcome, Ian. I'll also read out the officers that are in attendance. Firstly, it's Samuel Ball, trainee solicitor, who is acting on behalf of the Democratic Services. Connie Campbell, interim finance service manager. Well, apologies from Stephen Hines, and welcome to David Gill, the head of law and governance. Richard Congwer, the closing down accounts, and Judith Sweeney, Democratic Services electoral services officer. Finally, we have the following auditors in attendance: Grant Pattison, external audit from Grant Thornton, and Paul Harvey, external auditor from Grant Thornton also. For the purpose of the regulation, I can confirm that before this remote meeting went live, all participants confirmed that they can hear they can see and or hear all other participants. Is that correct? Thank you. This meeting will be conducted in accordance with the County Council Adoption Remote Meeting Procedure Rules, a summary of which is attached in tonight's agenda for reference. May I also politely remind all participants that they must not act in a disorderly or disruptive manner or otherwise interfere with the committee's proper conduct of business. Okay, thank you. Therefore, if you go on to the agenda, and we'll look at item 1, apologies for absence.
None received, Chair.
None received at the moment, thank you. Appointment of substitutes.
None received that we know of.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest? No, thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting, to read and confirm and sign the minutes of the previous meeting in accordance with Rule 19 of Part 4 of the Constitution. Everybody happy with that? Okay. If anybody's got anything to say about that, just put your hand up and then you can have your say. Thank you. Item 5 is the action list arising from the previous minute. There was no action list arising from that minute or from the previous minutes. Partitions or deputations?
None received.
None received. Thank you. Item 7, Statement of Accounts and Annual External Audit, ISA 260 Governance Report 2019-20. We've got the Deputy report of Deputy Chief Executive, but I understand who's doing the first report. Is that Connie? Okay. Are we all prepared, ready to receive Connie's report? Okay, over to you, Connie. Thank you.
Okay, I'd just like to introduce the report. What I'm doing is seeking the approval of the Statement of Accounts for 2019-20, subject to the 2 recommendations in the committee report. And also there's a requirement for the Section 151 officer, Stephen Hines, to sign a letter of representation afterwards, which he, once any adjustments are made to the accounts, and by the 30th of this month, that's what his intention is to do that and make sure it informs all members. And also part of the recommendation is, although we've got the Stephen signed off the unaudited accounts and it's subject to an audit, there still may be some further adjustments to be made by the auditors. So we're seeking recommendation to delegate the responsibility for finalising the accounts to the Section 151 officer. But what I thought I would do is just take you through a very high level, some slides of the statement of accounts, because we've got a statement of accounts document, which I think is about 118 pages long. So just at a very high level, I'll just take you through it. Sam, okay, could you take us to the next slide, please? So this one's just introducing, that was the title. So on the agenda items there, we're just going to highlight different areas: the budget, expenditure that's happened, the outturn, income and capital expenditure and reserves, and the borrowing impact of the COVID-19. And last thing is any other business. So if you could go on to the next slide, please. So this is just a very high level view of the budgets for each of the different departments within the council. So we've got community and wellbeing, which where we say was our original plan, which original budget of 1.491 million, and then the revised one, 1.584, for example. And then going along this chart, you can see the size of the budgets for each of the different departments within the council. If you move to the next slide, please. That's it. This slide here takes us through how did we spend against budget. So it shows you that we've got the budgets here, like for instance, finance and resources. We had a budget of 1.574 million. We spent 1.76 million. And if you go along the charts, you can see the comparison with each of the other departments, like community and wellbeing, and all the other areas, senior leadership team, and and it lists out all the other departments at a high level. If you could turn to the next slide. So this slide here, this shows the major key sources of income. So, for example, the largest source of income is the council's share of the council tax and business rates, which is here we've got 3.9 million. And then you can see the other sources of funding: settlement funding, Section 31 grant, which is grants, money received from the government, and also new homes bonus, and other general smaller grants, which are all lumps together. So you can see there's various different sources of income for the council. So if we move on to the next slide, which is the capital expenditure and financing. And these, we've got two charts here. The first one shows the housing revenue account expenditure, and in blue was 2.3 million. And then we got what the actual service delivery is. So these are the projects are just broken down into different areas. So we've got service delivery 1.6, and then we've got policy, finance and development projects. So it's just the way the projects are actually broken down and the way we do expenditure. And then then across the other side on the orange, we've got major repairs allowance, 1.8 million. And then we've got borrowing. And so the orange is showing how things are actually funded. So we've got borrowing of 1.5 million, capital receipts 822,000, and then we've got other sources funded 241,000, then government grants 19,000. So just these two charts, just a comparison between expenditure and how we actually finance our capital expenditure. Next slide we have, if we can move to that one, we have here it just gives an overview of what the council's reserves are. So earmarked reserves, these are reserves that we have for specific purposes. We've got 2.195 million. And then we've got the housing revenue account reserves, which is 1.132 million. And then we've got also capital receipts, which is just over a million, 1.046 million. And then we've also got the general funds reserves as well, which is just over a million. So in summary, that's all the council reserves. So this is just basically a quick tour through the accounts. Obviously, the statement of accounts shows this information in more detail, but it's just a quick overview. So following that presentation, does anyone have any questions at this point?
Any questions at this point? Come can I ask a question with regards to that? That's where what you've just presented now, that's where we sit at this point in time going forward.
Yeah, yeah. So that was the point in time at this point in time. So obviously, when the budgets are set, there might be changes to the reserves or different things. But at this point in time, at the end of 1920, that's where we sat. So obviously, this financial year, we've obviously got transactions are taking place. So there might be slight changes to that to this year. But yeah, but that was the position at the 31st of March 2020.
Any questions with regards to that? Can't see anybody coming up yet. No? Just press your button if you want to speak, or just come forward. Okay. All right, we'll move on from that. And if we have a second report, Samuel?
There's a second presentation on behalf of Grant Thornton, Chair.
Okay.
Is it either Paul or Grant taking that presentation?
I think we're going to sort of share. I'm going to lead on it, shall we say, and then I think Paul will provide comment as necessary. So
Absolutely fine. Let me just bring that up on the screen for you. There we go. Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Okay. So Simon, if you can maybe move on 2 pages till you get to the headlines page, that's fine. So, thank you. So yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Samuel. What we're going to take you through today is, as the overarching report indicated, you've got the financial statements for the year ending 31st of March 2020 in front of you today. As part of that, we undertake your external audit of the financial statements, and as part of our overall responsibilities, we're also responsible for giving an opinion in relation to value for money in terms of the accounts. I think as the paper from Stephen Hines alludes to, we're currently auditing the accounts. And what I'm looking to here is give you an update of where we are as part of that process. The changes that I will take you through here, and this isn't a complete audit findings report at the moment. We're saying it's an interim audit findings report. One change from when it's a long time ago now, since probably at this time of the first lockdown back in March when we brought our audit plan to you. The one change in terms of our overall audit strategy was we did introduce a new risk in relation to COVID-19 and the pandemic and the impact that it might have upon the financial statements process. So when I come through this report, you will see a new risk in there that wasn't reported to you earlier. So that's really the only change we've made around that. I will talk to it a little bit more, but it's mainly around some of the uncertainties about valuations at the year end. And there was that concern around whether you'd be able to work remotely and the impact that might have on accounts preparation. So in terms of where are we on the financial statements, well, I think as you can see from the date of the financial statements, you produced the financial statements at the end of August. The government had allowed councils, because of the pandemic, to complete the initial publication of draft accounts by the end of August. It's normally the end of May, and then we had until the end of November to complete the audit of the accounts. Our audit is still in progress. as part of the conversations with officers and the council, recognising some of the priorities you were looking at doing and keeping the, I suppose, the people of Ode safe and working through that and closing down the accounts. We were initially going to look to start our audit back in August, but we've deferred that closer to October and November. And that means actually we are still actually in progress on the audit at the moment. We haven't identified any matters which prevent us issuing an unqualified opinion at this point in time, but I do need to bring to your attention that there is a significant amount of work in progress. I will come on to that a little bit later, and hopefully, if need be, Richard and Comi can give insight into that. I think there is a lot of items there that we need to get through. I'm looking at that list of items thinking, I don't think there's anything there that is of great significance, but I am conscious there's a lot of that in small individual bits to get through in terms of that for us to complete our audit by the close of this month. The three main bits, just to probably bring to your attention, are in relation to the work that's out in progress. A significant portion of those do belong to around the collection fund, where in association with Comi and the officers, we did identify that there were potentially some issues with the reports that are coming off the system at the year end, especially around debtors balances and income. And you're currently, or the office is currently updating those reported figures. We will then need to review those and audit them. A challenge this year, a new point, sort of increased audit scrutiny this year is around property, plant and equipment. So that's basically your other land and buildings and your council dwellings. And that's building upon the challenges, and I'm sure that members have been aware of challenges that the Financial Reporting Council has indicated around auditors and improving the quality of audit. In respect, and one of the areas that they do focus upon is valuations of property, plant and equipment. And specifically now they are indicating that, and whilst maybe as a public sector auditor, you're not quite the same as a commercial, you're not taking out loans that are maybe set up against the value of your assets. And generally the public sector manages its assets in a different way through different systems. However, the accounting standards do say that we need to make sure that they're not materially misstated, and therefore we have to have a focus upon property, plant and equipment, and particularly the assumptions and information that valuers have used. So this year's audit, there's probably a greater granularity of the audit evidence that we're looking for in return of that. And as part of that, I think the council is now looking to pull that evidence together, and that's probably maybe a step change up to what's happened in prior years, and therefore we haven't finished that work yet. And one in relation to council dwellings, and there might be some jargon in here in terms of audit jargon or valuation jargon, but there is around council dwellings. The way that council dwellings are generally valued is rather than going around, I think it's looking at your 1,002 individual properties and individually valuing them. There's a beacon principle applied where you put them into these different classifications. You get an average value for those classifications, and then you sort of multiply it up. You've identified that there might be some errors within those one of those classifications, or where some properties have been allocated, around about 100 properties, and we're trying to work out, or your officers are now working through that to see whether, if by moving them between beacons, there might be a material difference to the accounts. So we're still working through that, and there's some issues there. Depending on where we get through with that, then there may well be an adjustment to the accounts. And being a relatively small council, and materiality for yourselves is around about £400,000 or just over. So it probably wouldn't take much of that movement. So there is a potential for that to move, but we're still waiting officers' final calculations to come through on that. So in terms of that, in terms of the work in progress, I'll come on to a bit more detail a bit later. The one thing to bring to your attention, and I'm sure this is in relation, this is COVID-19 related, in terms of those valuations of those property, plant and equipment at the year end, is the valuers, the independent valuers in relation to their own professional standards for the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors have issued what they would call a valuation material uncertainty disclosure. And that's basically saying it's not that you can't rely upon their valuations in the year, but they are subject to greater uncertainty. So you will be disclosing that in the financial statements, and we feel as auditors that's important for a reader to know, and therefore we will be putting in what we would call an emphasis of matter within our auditor's report. It's not a qualification. It's simply, from our perspective, drawing a reader's attention to the financial statements about something that's properly disclosed in there. And we believe readers need to understand when they're reading those accounts, that important piece of information around those uncertainties. And then linked into that actually is, I'm sure as members are aware, employees of the council are part of the local government pension scheme, and that one's administered by Leicestershire County Council. The assets within the pension fund, they also have invested in property in some areas, and the pension fund auditor, as we will understand it, will be also issuing an emphasis matter in respect of material uncertainty valuation disclosures within the pension fund itself. And given the share of the council's of assets around that, we believe that, well, that disclosure will be made in your accounts, and again, we will draw attention to it. On the same basis, we will not, it's not a qualification, it's just highlighting to a reader that there is some valuation uncertainty. In terms of value for money, I'll come on to that in a bit more detail in a moment, but we are proposing an unqualified value for money conclusion. Can you just move on to the next page now, Samuel, please? Can we move on?
Do you want the next slide?
Yes, it's come up now. Thank you. Sorry. In terms of, I did mention materiality. This is just a reminder. The materiality is, as I say, it's £420,000 for the council, and performance materiality is how we set our testing, and that's slightly lower at nearly 300,000. So if you move on to the next slide, please. Right, thank you. This is in terms of the work that is outstanding on the audit, and as I was alluding to earlier, it is quite a long list. But as I was saying through this, I think you can see, well, if I know you hadn't had time to read this, we've taken you through that. The first few are around the council tax, and that links into the collection fund. We also have queries out. As auditors, what we do is we get breakdowns of the balances within the accounts, and then we would sample from those, and we have queries out in relation to some of those samples. We've highlighted there the issue around the beacons, and there is other items out there, sort of reconciliation papers, where we can bridge between the accounts and the trails that we've got at the moment. My view as your auditor is there's quite a lot of work to get through over the next few days if we're going to hit the end of November deadline. We are committed to work with Commy, Richard, and the council, generally to achieve that. But I can't say, I don't want to say here today and say there's not a risk that we might not be able to achieve that by the end of November, but we are all working towards being able to sign off the accounts probably on Monday. But there is a risk that we might not achieve that. Can we go on to the next page, please? Okay. These next pages are what I was alluding to at the beginning around the risks that we informed you about within our plan back in March. And as I was saying, the new one here is around COVID-19. I don't need to say, I don't think much more to that around this. Highlights the work we've undertaken in understanding how you mitigated those risks, whether we could get sufficient evidence through remote technology. And as we can see today, we're using well, from us internally, we use Teams, you're using Zoom. We've used sort of screen sharing and elements like that to get the information through. I wouldn't, I'd be honest and say all audits are taking longer, not just yours. And I think that's part of the approach of sharing information. And we are seeing that coming through our approach. That's not just grant forms. And I think all audit firms are seeing those issues. The one we did in terms of revenue cycles, just to remind members, under auditing standards, there's an assumed risk that there might be fraudulent transactions within the revenue cycle, which is income. We are able to rebut that at ODB because we understand your income streams, and nothing's come through our audit that said that was an incorrect rebuttal. Can we move on to the next slide? The other significant risk that we cannot override, we have to assume as auditors is management override of controls. Now we assess the control environment. That's not suggesting that your officers are overriding the controls, but we assess the environment, and where we landed on the plan was what we needed to do was the risk. If they were going to do that, they would do that through the journal system. We've been sampling journals. Our sampling to date hasn't identified any issues, but we've got around about, we still get information on 6 journals to come back in and we're still working our way through that. But currently, we've not identified any issues with that. In terms of the valuation of land and buildings, I've already really gone through that in detail. We're still working our way through some of that information. We're still waiting for the information that was sent to the or provided to the valuer to underpin their valuations. And that's generally what we're looking for, is either depending on the nature of the property, but it might be the floor area, the building size, or it could be an income stream. It just depends on the nature of that valuation. I think once we've done that, then hopefully we can tie everything up, and then we can look at the valuation of the council's assets. But that work is still in process. And as we're saying there, the one estimate we put down there is we are anticipating that we'd be ensuring an emphasis of matter in relation to the overall valuation. And could we move on to the next slide, please? The other big estimate within your financial statements, I'm sure you're aware of this, is evaluation is your pension fund liability, and we're undertaking work on that. As I say, that work is still in progress. We received part of that work is we do ask for assurances from the audit of the pension fund. We've had the beginning of that come back yesterday. We're still working through that process. At this point in time, we haven't identified any specific issues. Can we move on, please? Here, really just highlighting the work in relation to those key estimates around valuations, and this one covers the council dwellings, and this one here highlights the issue around the 100 properties that might be in the wrong beacon. The original estimate we've had, it might have a £400,000 impact on the accounts, but again, as I say, officers are working through to finalise the estimate, so that may well be an adjustment that might have to go through the accounts, but as I say, we're waiting on the final working paper for that. Can we have the next page, please? Okay. As well as the council dwellings, we have other land and buildings. Again, as I was saying, this is of greater focus for us this year from the Financial Reporting Council and from us as auditors. So what we've been looking at here is we picked a sample of 12 properties, and again, this is when we're waiting for the information to come through from the valuer. So I'm not in this process. I can't directly give you any more information about that in time. This is one of the areas we're working through with officers. The next one, please. As I say, and I always mention the pension. I've already mentioned the pension estimate and pension liabilities. I mean, this really is a page just to show that some of the assumptions that we look at and check that the assumptions that underpin your valuation of that aren't outside of what we'd expect to see. We employ, well, not employ, PwC actually act as our auditors expert, not just for Grant Thornton, but across all auditors of local government. And what they do is give us an independent view of whether the assumptions by the actuaries, and there's only 4 actuaries that do the local government pension scheme, are reasonable. And then what we do is check that your assumptions are in that range, and if they're outside that range, we would challenge and see if that's consistent with your local circumstances. So you can see from this table, we've gone through the assumptions and they're all consistent. The elements we're still working on at the moment, though, are at the bottom of the page, where, as I say, part of that information is relating on what we get back from the auditor of the pension fund, just to confirm the council share of the assets in the fund and around any changes in the year, and that work is still in progress. But at the moment, we haven't found any issues. And I suppose in a way that's probably the run through of the numbers, so to speak. What I'm going to move on to now is more around going concern and value for money. So in terms of going concern, it is a concept within the public sector. It's not the same as it is in the commercial sector, because clearly you have tax raising powers, and there's a general override in the public sector that would say, actually, if any council did fail, then its services would be picked up by another council. So you would always prepare your accounts on a going concern basis. However, clearly, as your auditors, we do need to gain assurance so that we put in our opinion that you have sufficient liquidity to continue to provide services over 12 months from our opinion date at least, which is of November of next year. So we've gone through looking at your cash flow projections and elements relevant of that, and we're satisfied at the moment that there is no material uncertainty in your ability to continue to operate I suppose from an auditing perspective over the next 12 months from now going forward, although I'll come on to it in value for money, your level of reserves at the moment would see you fairly resilient given the current challenges. Can we go to the next page, please? In terms of other matters to communicate to you, we haven't any matters to relate to you, talk to you about fraud. These come out of the Code of Audit Practice. Related parties, currently we're not aware of any transactions that haven't been disclosed, and no issues to report. We haven't identified anything in relation to law and regulations. We will be seeking, as you've heard earlier, a letter of representation from the council in respect of the way that the accounts have been put together. That's in draft at the moment, pending finalisation of our work. I don't at the moment, and I've asked for any specific representations, but there may be some more general ones around the pandemic and elements like that, depending. But there might be some specific representations depending on where the audit findings end up. We haven't found any material omissions in the financial statements at this point in time, and this is where I've alluded to earlier around the work is still in progress, and we are working to meet that statutory deadline at the end of November. But there does remain a risk that, depending on how we get through the level of work in the next few days, whether we will meet that or not. Can we go on to the next page, please? Final bits, just in terms of the financial statements, if I'm sure members have read through them, but if you look at the financial statements, it's basically 3 chunks. There's a narrative report, the annual governance statement, and the accounts. We also read the narrative report and the annual governance statement, and we're satisfied that they are consistent with our knowledge and understanding of the council. So we're proposing an unqualified opinion in respect of those and not reporting by exception. We also do a return to the NAO and the whole of government accounts. There's a £500 million threshold for that. You're below that threshold, so we will just be returning a simple return confirming those numbers to the NAO. And when we do complete our audit, we would be able to certify it closed. We've had no representations from the public around objections and questions this year. So once the audit is complete, we should be able to certify it closed. Can we go to the next page, please? So I said at the beginning that we primarily had 2 big roles, which is one looking at the accounts, the numbers that are in front of you, but also looking at value for money. And in our plan, which we brought you back in March, the one residual risk that we said we'd look at would be, or the 2 residual risks were the financial sustainability of the council, and also recognising that yourselves as an audit committee are new and growing into the role. So we said we would have a brief look at those. And can we go on to the next page, please? Oh, sorry, and the page after that, sorry. Okay, so in terms of financial sustainability, this summarises our work where, and as you've as you already heard from the presentation earlier, you reported a small overspend of 72k on your budget for this year, and it has left you, as at the end of March, with a general fund reserve of just over £1 million and earmark reserves of approximately £2.2 million. So I suppose if you put those 2 together, I think you set a net budget for 1920 of around about £6 million, so that they probably form about half of that net budget. I think it is important to draw to your attention that you are, as I'm sure members are aware, a relatively small council, and looking back on 18-19 value for money profiles, we can see that your level of reserves, I don't think looking at you as an absolute term is that relevant or a measure, because clearly it links into the size of the council. But I suppose if you do compare your level of reserves against the average of district councils, yours are around about 4% in terms of the general fund reserve, as opposed to an average of 13%. And for earmark reserves, yours are around about 19% of your expenditure, compared to, I suppose, about 37% for the average. So you are at the lower end or lower quartile in terms of level of reserves. But as a council, though, you have made that commitment that your general fund reserve needs to be around about 10% of your net budget spend. So that is ended up about £600,000, and your general fund reserve is currently more than that. So you're within the own parameters that you've set, and you've also set a set for the current financial year, and a balanced budget for the HRA. And looking at Q2, we know this is an unusual year in terms of COVID and the impact that has. You have reported an adverse variance of about £250,000 against that. And the main reason for that, and I'm sure members aren't surprised at this, is relation to COVID, and where the pandemic really has not only given you additional costs of just over £380,000, but also you're experiencing, along with a lot of councils, impact on your income, and that's a great a loss of about 1.1 million. Now, you have received grants of 1.4 million from government to offset that in the first half of the year. So a lot of that variance is in relation to that 167,000 in relation to the pandemic. You're currently looking at finalising your budget proposal 21-22, and that will come to members early in the new year. And we are aware that you're modelling for internally modelling scenarios, taking into account the current economic situation and those pressures as you best know them, because clearly it is quite a fluid environment as part of your decision-making process. And in common with local government, with the rest of local government, you do face a challenging future, which is driven by reductions in income and an increase in demand for your services, further complicated by, as I was saying there, the uncertainty relating to the pandemic. And also, as we were hearing yesterday from the Chancellor, it's only been in a 1-year settlement, so clearly that does make planning for all councils difficult into the medium and longer term, if you don't have that clarity of the funding streams. Our conclusion is you are aware, that you'll need to monitor those decisions from the government with regard to that funding, and inevitably there's going to be an ongoing need for you to keep revisiting those predictions and forecasts as new information comes to light. And I think we have to recognise that may involve, not just for yourselves, but I suppose it's more general sector issue, difficult and challenging decisions on priorities in order to deliver balanced budgets over the coming years. And that probably will probably lead into looking at how you deliver services with need be going forward, whilst also maintaining that budgetary control. So overall, I mean, that was where our findings on that. I'm satisfied as your auditor that you have sufficient reserves certainly in the short to medium term as a council to make you resilient against the issues of the pandemic, but you will need to keep close monitoring of that. And on that basis, I'm satisfied that risk has been mitigated. And can we go on to the next page, please? And the second risk we looked at for value for money was around, as I say, the change in the governance and the introduction of the audit committee yourselves. I know there have been probably fewer meetings this year as a result of the pandemic, but we are aware that from our attendance, and I know Paul's been at one, and I've been at one as well, that you are challenging or you are questioning the reports as appropriate, and you're still, but I think you are beginning to embed yourself within the council's governance arrangements, and we're satisfied you're getting the right training. So at this point in time, I think there's no issues that I really need to bring to your attention. I think it will be great to focus on all the committees going forward as a result of the Redmond review and elements like that. So we'll look to work with you going forward around how that role develops as you embed yourself within the council. So can we go to the next page, please? So that's in a way bringing through in terms of that's where we are on audit at the moment. Next few pages are what we have to report to you, that we do remain independent of the council. If you go on to the next page, please. And just a reminder that as well as the audit, we do undertake other work for the council, and that's mainly that's 2 grant claims: your housing benefit claim and your capital receipts claim. And when we undertake that work, we undertake that under sort of national agreed upon procedures that the departments lay down. So we are following procedures along those lines. And the next page, please. Okay, and I think this is the final page that we're coming to. Just a reminder, or a couple of pages in respect of fees. I think what we're highlighting here is, I think really just for members' attention, as we're bringing in, one of the effects of COVID is audits are taking longer. and we're seeing, I suppose, from as an audit firm, we believe that our costs are increasing by around about 25%, I think, overall. So we will be discussing, I think, as the audits conclude with all clients around the impact about that would have in terms of the fee base, and in respect of that, in terms of looking to see fee variations, but any fee variation would need to be agreed with PSAA. I think we're not the only firm that's experiencing this, the challenge of COVID in terms of audits taking longer. And as we've highlighted there, we're also seeing that in the commercial sector. And then, sorry, and the final page really is a summary of those additional fees, which at the moment, there's no change on those fees. So that's where I'm sorry that's taken a bit longer to go through, and conscious because we have tabled it today. It's important that we took you through it page by page, but happy to take questions that members might have, unless Paul's got anything particularly that specifically that he would like to add. So, okay.
No? Okay. Can I ask a broad question?
It's just one thing. I'm struggling to find my hand to put up, but I do want to ask some questions, if I may. But
yeah, okay, over to you, Jeffrey.
Okay, Chair, I hope you'll allow these questions. It's the first time I've sat on a specific audit committee, and you may rule some of these questions out of order, but somebody I'm sure will tell me. I've got a few notes down here. We talked about the asset value of the council properties, I think.
Yeah.
Can somebody tell me whether any account has been taken of any cladding that may be found in our properties or not? I've seen in our family, we've got personal experience of a £500,000 flat that has become valueless because of this cladding problem. And I just wondered, there's no cladding, but because of this certificate it appears that people need. I just wondered whether that affects the valuation that you would be liable to give to our flats as far as our audit is concerned. Do you want me to do more, or
I'm not sure. Sorry, Councillor, it's Grant. I'm not sure I can answer that one directly. I think it is a valid. I think from your perspective, you're asking whether there's been any impairment, I suppose, of the values of the council dwellings as a result of cladding. I'm not aware we've identified anything in that aspect in relation to that. You normally see it in high-rise blocks and elements like that, I think more, but I'm not aware of that being an issue. I don't know if Paul has any insight into that as well. So, no, okay.
Perhaps I can suggest, Jeffrey, it's a good question actually, because the housing stock is a service delivery. Perhaps that question could go there, and a little bit of report to say yes or no, we have problems with our flats, or whether we've got any problems with the houses. I think that's a good question. That.
Well, the problem is, Chair, that we've missed out a series of meetings where I would have asked.
Absolutely, that.
Yeah. Can I also ask, is there somewhere in the accounts a figure that estimates the amount of 106 monies that we're allowed? For instance, we do have one particular place where I think we should be getting about £500,000 worth of 106 money, and it's been outstanding for a number of years. Is that considered a potential asset of the council, and is it taken account of anywhere?
Yeah, I don't know the particular project you're talking about. I mean, normally on Section 106 monies, you would normally get those. They are normally linked into planning, so you would normally get the money as a result. I mean, I'm sure I'm the head of law and democracy, might have a view on that. I was going to say, sorry, Dave. I was about to say, but normally you wouldn't normally, I suppose, go ahead with a planning without having the cash through the door. But I'll hand over to someone who does this on a more daily basis. So.
Thank you. I mean, the position is with regard to Section 106 monies, it is not a council asset in the strictest sense because it is ring fenced and it can only be used for a particular thing. Section 106 monies are kept in separate accounts from the council's general accounts because we have to account for each of those or each penny that we get and how we spend it. So they wouldn't be generally be included within this. There will be a separate statement of the Section 106 account, which sets out exactly how much money we've got in and how much interest, and subsequently how it's going to be spent.
That they will be in your accounts somewhere. I will find it because there'll be Section 106 grants. But yes, I agree that they'll be and because they're normally time barred as well. That you normally have to spend the money within a certain period of time. Oh, sorry, Colin can tell me exactly where they are in the account. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So the Section 106 money, we do account for them in the accounts. They're kept separately, as David said, and obviously. They are, because obviously the statement of accounts, you're only seeing a certain amount, you're seeing sort of high level detail. So they are within our account. So we do keep monitor all that money. And obviously, as David said, they only can be used for specific purposes.
Yeah. As far as
Not me.
agents, I've looked in the accounts that I've got, and I realise it's up until March of this year. So do the figures for agency staff include experts that we may want to get in to do specific jobs that we don't employ people in the council, or are these for replacement of staff that are not here? Because I see that there's been quite a big increase in the things that we're in the budget that I was looking at, the accounts for last year, and it's a significant increase. And I just wondered, are these ordinary people filling in because people are off sick or whatever it is, or could they be for special projects that we don't have expertise in the council?
Jeffrey, it can be. It depends very much on. It can be that we've got people that we're utilising for covering on the bins or whatever, but then again, we might have a particular person to do a specific role that they are employed by an agency because we don't have the expertise in-house.
Is that figure, are both figures included in the 630,000? Because it was up from 484,000 the previous year, and I just wondered if it's for, are those two figures combined in the accounts? I'm sorry, the accounts are a bit like a foreign language to me, so if it's listed separately, I couldn't find it, but I'm not saying it's not there.
On my budget, if I'm employing a specialist to do a particular project, and if I employ somebody to cover for an illness or something, they are both coded to the same line, which is hired staff. So as far as I'm concerned, yes, they're all contained together.
I just wonder, then, is it, for me to understand it, I can understand getting people in for a specialist thing and you have to employ somebody who we don't employ internally. Would it not be easier for us to understand if agency staff are replacing people for sickness or whatever other reasons would be listed separately? But is that not the norm? Well, I don't know what the normal way is, but is it not easier for people to understand?
Who wants to answer that comment?
I suppose it could be done, but if I may, Chair, we're slightly going off the purpose of this meeting. You know, we're in specific questions. What you do here to do today is to approve or note the statement of accounts, and then you're being asked to delegate it to the section 151 to do the letter. 120 odd pages. If we go through it page by page, I think we'll be sitting here till Christmas. I mean, I appreciate members may have some concerns about particular questions, but those questions really ought to be asked outside of this meeting, directly with the chairs of the committees could do it with the accountants. It would probably be easier to say, you know, we're an hour already, and if we've only got through one member so far.
Let me come in there, please. David, I understand what you're saying, but we're here to scrutinise what's been put before us. And with the greatest respect, if somebody's got a question to ask because there's a particular issue or not, or for clarification, I think it's only right they should ask it. Because from my point of view, I've sent in a page full of questions, and thank you for coming to replying to them. But having gone through the document again, I've got another 20 questions that I'd like to ask, but I won't do that because of what you just said. If I might then come back just to ask Grant, if I may, comments that you made with regards to you might be able to sign this off, we might be able to get a letter done, we might be able to do this by the 30th or 31st. How does that impact on the recommendations A or B? Because that says we've got to approve what we're doing here.
Well, okay, I'd take a step back from that. I mean, in terms of, I think what I said, clearly it's your recommendation. What you're being asked to do effectively is delegate, having read these accounts, I think the assumption is at the moment is we're working through that there won't be significant amendments to those accounts. So I will paraphrase, the recommendation is if there aren't any significant amendments to the accounts, that you would delegate the final sign off of those to Stephen Hines as 151 officer, and also improving the letter of representation. So if that deadline isn't met, okay, and I think I would say that, we're from our side working very hard to do that, and Commie and Richard from your side are doing very hard to do that. There's a couple of things that would happen is, I suppose, one, I would point out you would not be alone. I think there are some councils who we won't personally as a firm be able to get over the line by the end of November, and I know where there are other firms who also won't be able to do that. So you would just need to publish a reason about why we couldn't issue our audit opinion by the end of November. I would hope we would get it done. If we don't get it done by Monday, it wouldn't be that many days afterwards that we would finish the work. So I think what you're saying here is, I mean, my commitment to you as your auditor would be, if there is any material changes to these accounts, and I'd have to come back to you anyway. So if part of our audit came up and went, actually, there's a significant change to the accounts, I'm duty bound to report that, probably to yourself as chair, to be honest, rather than, but we can also do it the whole committee. I think what I would offer to do then is almost like recirculate the audit findings report, but maybe highlights and go just to let you know, because what we'd normally put in here is an adjustments page to say we've gone through the accounts, this is what we discussed with officers, this is what's changed. So that page, I think, would have to be recirculated, and certainly my commitment to you would be, if anything of significance changes, and that, I suppose, in the way we would let you know that, because I'd be duty bound to do that. I think what this delegation is if we go through the accounts and there's some minor things that need to change, but it doesn't really affect the true and fair view, is to speed that process up. The delegation is being asked to be given to the 151 officer and to mitigate that going forward. So I don't think there's any, so that's really what you're being asked to do today in terms of approving the accounts is, I suppose, are they, from your perspective, and I do agree with you, Chair, that you're those charged with governance, are these a fair representation of the council's position in your perspective as at the end of March, having gone through this process with officers? That's what you're really saying today. And letter of representation is sort of, in a way, having approved that is really saying to me as your auditor that you're satisfied that the council's provided me with all the information I need to finish the audit effectively, that you're not, I suppose in a way, in simplicity terms, you're not concealing anything from me. So I don't think it will have that impact. But as part of the process is, if there are big changes, we will tell you what's happened. And I'm sure the officers will tell you as well, but we are duty bound as auditors to inform you as well. So.
The paper that you read from,
Yep.
Samuel, I've not got a copy of that. I'm sure you tell me it's on the iPad, but I'd like an hard copy.
Yes, no, that's fine. I mean, I think we've sent it to Stephen Hines as 151, and we're presenting it today. As I say, we've been working on this up until today, and we just felt we wanted to be in the most. That's why I've read it to you today, to be honest, Chair, because we'd normally give it to you in advance, and you'd have a chance to read it, and picking up on, you may be able to make comments on it. So yeah, we're happy to share that as with it is, and actually we're probably the versions out there now. Certainly, I'll be happy for David and the team to put it on the as part of the papers now, because it is the paper of the audit committee. It can go on as an agenda item, so that it's not been hidden in that way. It's out there.
No, I appreciate that. Jeffrey, are you okay with that? Is you with us, Jeffrey?
Chair, what Councillor Kaufman is doing it, I will very quickly answer. In relation to agency staff, under the accounting standards, they will be classified as employee benefits, basically. So the accounts are correct. If you want more detail behind that, then I think, as the officers are quite right, they can provide that. So it's just the way that the accounting standards work. It all gets lumped into, I suppose, employee benefits. So it's one place. Otherwise, it could be all over. Or potentially it could go in, as David Gill was alluding to, it could go into a project, isn't it? But mainly they're employee benefits, which is where you'll see the figure.
I'm grateful for that, and I'm quite happy to. I accept that everything is right, but I have a problem this year, and I don't know whether it's shared with fellow members of the committee, that because of the COVID arrangements and the arrangements people have had to make for COVID, I feel sort of I don't have as much say, control, or whatever word you want, in the way that things have worked this year. So some of the questions that I've asked tonight, I should have had the opportunity at a meeting or a briefing where I could have seen this and asked those questions. And I feel that we've had a series of meetings where we probably could have done it. And I think, if anything, my criticism is that because of the problems we've got at the moment, I'm feeling more isolated and not as much as in control as I would have liked. I don't know how other members of this committee feel, but that's my personal feeling. But thank you for the answer.
Okay. Can I ask, Commy, you kept putting your hand up at some point. Did you want to come in on any of those subjects?
I think the points have been covered about the staffing, because they're in the accounts all lumped together. I mean, obviously when we monitor it, it's individually, we separate it out. So, but for the purposes of tonight, for the accounts, they would be together, which is already, I think Grant's already alluded to, and also David.
Okay. Can I ask members if there are any more questions to Grant with what he's said? I don't know whether you can put your hands up or not, or whether you just want to come in. No hands, Samuel?
No hands raised, Chair.
No hands? No. So from the point of view of the audit paper that Grant, you've just proposed to us, it would seem then that we are in a reasonable position to move forward in the next year financially. And some of the sums I have read on there seems quite positive. And we're not going to be in a situation where, who knows, I suppose, where we might have to sell up off all the assets to survive.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. I suppose as an auditor, yeah, we've looked at that and we feel that you're certainly in the short term, you have sufficient resources to make yourselves resilient. I don't have a crystal ball, as you're alluding to find out exactly how things will go, how the economy will bounce back, and how people's behaviours might change as a result of the pandemic. I'm afraid I don't have that, and that's why we're alluding to. Well, that's why my comments there that you'll need to be agile around this, because I think as things develop, I could be, if the vaccine comes in and we all go back to behaving the same way we did beforehand, then things might, then hopefully the economy will eventually bounce back and normality will return. I suspect there'll be somewhere in between. I think, I don't know. I think, I mean, my view as your auditor is, you are relatively small. I think you're resilient in the short term. It's understanding in the medium to longer term what the impact might be. And that's really why you need to keep a review on that. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe picking up finally on Councillor Kaufman's point around these are the statutory accounts, and they are prepared in a statutory accounts way. You'll have other governance measures for monitoring your in-year and your in-year performance and elements like that, which is more cash-based. So it's not just the accounts alone. This is the year-end figure effectively, but you will have governance arrangements internally around keeping track of where you are against your own performance, and that does go through. And probably, whilst I think in terms of the council's point of view, I think we're all challenged with that control. We're all working remotely and things like that, and elements like that. But I think from what I've seen, you're beginning to, or you're working your way through that. So,
okay, thank you. And I think it's in members would agree that under these unprecedented times with what's happening and what's happened I think the officers and that have done a reasonable job to keep us where we are today. So whether they can pass that back, David, to your colleagues and comment that you know, it's unprecedented, as I've just said. You all deserve a medal because of what's happening. It's just unfortunate that the rewards are not going to come as it's been alluded to today. But is there any other questions? I think if not, we can move on to the recommendations if anybody wants to share anything with us.
Chair, if I could just make a suggestion.
Yes.
You said yourself that you had some questions. If you want to put those questions back through as via email, then obviously we'll do what we've previously done and provide you with a more detailed answer to the minutiae outside of the meeting. We don't want members to feel that they're not being involved or informed. If you ask us the questions, we'll provide the answers. But as I said, it's just that tonight is not the forum to go into all the minor details. And that applies to any other member, that if they've got a query on what they've seen, just send the message in and we will give them a response.
Yes, that's okay, I think. But the reason for me about this committee is that it's you're dealing with the accounts. We look at the weaknesses and the strengths and challenge those, because that's what the committee is for. And I appreciate what you're saying, David, and you're absolutely right. But at the same time, it's about transparency and being able to share those questions with other members who may then have a supplementary on top of that. So we don't feel disenfranchised. And then, because once you do it in writing, I've got these here, and can we thank you for all those answers, that there were supplementaries from it. But we don't want to do it here because you say we'll be here till doomsday. It is, but I think that the principle of it is that we need to be in a position where members don't feel disenfranchised and that they feel they can ask questions. And yes, we may signpost them to somewhere else because that's where it's more fitting. But yes, I appreciate your comments, David. Thank you very much indeed. Shall we go then to the actual recommendations, which is on page 8 of your pack? And there's two recommendations, A and B. That the statements of accounts for the year ending 31st of March 2020 be reviewed and approved. And B, of course, is in order to comply with the statutory requirements of the statement, to be confirmed that the statement of accounts for the year end 31st of March 2020 can be published by 31st of November.
Yeah, I believe that is supposed to be the 30th of November.
That's the 30th, isn't it? Yeah.
That's correct, yeah.
Let's look at my diary then. 2020, and the section 151 officer be authorised following consultation with the chair. I don't like those sort of things, but we are where we are at the moment. Of the committee to make any changes to the accounts that may be agreed with Grant Thornton LLP, the council's external auditors. Samuel, you're going to do a named vote, aren't you?
That's correct, Chair. We do need a seconder for that. If you're moving those recommendations together, if there's a seconder.
Both together.
That's it, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I'll now read out members' names alphabetical by surname. If you can indicate whether you're for, against, or abstaining for the recommendations. Councillor Allam is absent, so Councillor Joshi.
For.
Councillor Kaufman.
For.
Councillor Kevin Lloydall.
For.
Councillor David Lloydall.
For.
Councillor Ridley.
For.
Thank you. That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. With that, David. Okay, I think that's the last item on the agenda, and I would thank you all for participating. And once again, thank you for this meeting, and the auditors, Grant and Paul, for your input. It's been very helpful. And again, for you, the officers who are riding all this out very bravely, I think, thank you for that as well.